Hey Pop Kids, it's Sunday the 11th of April 2021 and tomorrow lockdown as such changes and shops, non-essential shops and non-essential retail reopen, which I can't say I have not been looking forward to. Although in my mind, of course, essential retail includes buying records. Now today I'm going to be talking about, on episode 78 of Mark Talks About His Rubbish, no, episode 79 actually of Mark Talks About His Rubbish, I'm going to be talking about the third studio album by Pet Shop Boys, released in 1988. Here it is, Introspective. I am a huge fan of Pet Shop Boys, as you've probably noticed. There, that's better, isn't it? You can't see my face. And I'm going to be talking through their entire discography over however long this series runs, probably the next 40 years. But the third Pet Shop Boys album, Introspective, which came out in 1988. And so for that means I'm going to be talking about the album, I'm going to be talking about the singles, including Domino Dancing, the live tour in 1989, as evidenced by this tour programme, and a book, Pet Shop Boys, literally, by Chris Heath. By the way, this has recently been reprinted after being out of print for about 20 or 30 years. It's well worth getting if you get a chance to read it. It's really interesting, but I'm going to talk about that when I get that far. So, middle of 1988, I'm a 15-year-old kid. I'm growing up in Birmingham, England. Birmingham likes to think of itself as the second city, although culturally it's probably been replaced in people's minds and hearts by Manchester. And in my mind, Birmingham is the second city. There is a lot of competition for the second city in Britain. I'm not one for waving flags or for being particularly proud or not proud of where I come from. On this grounds, of course, I have to say and recognise that some truly terrible bands and celebrities have come out of Birmingham, by which point I'm going to mention UB40, Ozzy Osbourne as an individual, and Jasper Carrott. All thumbs down for them. But good things have come out of Birmingham too, including Duran Duran, the rest of Black Sabbath, including the famous Bill Ward, Judas Priest, and if you spread the net a little further and a little wider, Led Zeppelin, The Wonder Stuff, Pop Bleeds Itself, Ned's Atomic Dustbin, and many other bands, as well as actually Editors, one of my favourite bands, who started off from Birmingham, although they're kind of like a bit more geographically dispersed these days, and probably other things from Birmingham as well, which I don't remember. Sorry guys, this should probably have been a more slickly rehearsed stadium show. Look over there, there are fireworks, then there's an inflatable coming out of the stage over there. God, I miss gigs. So 1988, middle of 1988, I'm living in a 3-bedroomed house with my parents and my twin brother in a suburb in Birmingham. It was a pretty rough ride being 15 in 1988 in Birmingham. Financially, it was pretty tight. There wasn't a huge amount of money going around, and my prime skill at that point was making my pocket money extend to being able to buy all the records that I needed to buy, which I became very good at. And as I've mentioned in previous episodes, I used to buy 7-inch singles, albums, 12 inches from a shop called Woolworths on the Monday morning when they came out of the charts after they'd been discounted. Monday lunchtime. So Monday lunchtimes I always used to buy 7-inch singles, and the ones which I didn't get because they came out before I liked pop music, I was generally able to buy in jukebox editions with the centre holes punched out from various newsagents. Not this record. This record is Domino Dancing. It's the first single from Pet Shop Boys' album Introspective, and it's what's called the end of the Imperial Phase. Neil Tennant always regards bands as having an Imperial Phase, a phase where they're absolutely bulletproof and they can do no wrong whatsoever. Some bands, this Imperial Phase lasts a song or an album, and other bands are able to make this last 5-10 years. But a band's demographic, a band's fan base changes and grows old. So if you're 15, 16 and you get into a band and the band have been going for 5 or 6 years, you're then 22 maybe. You've probably, if you've gone to university, you've left. if you haven't gone to university, you're 5 years into a job. With any luck, you've met the boy or girl or pet that you want to spend the rest of your life with. Your life priorities are going to change a little bit, whether you like it or not. You're going to then start thinking about, certainly at this point when houses were more affordable, and the average price of a house in Britain was £44,000 in 1990. I couldn't imagine why a house would cost that much. But bearing in mind that an average salary was something like £12,000–13,000, and £13,000 a year in 1984 was what Neil Tennant earned working at Smash Hits, which is the equivalent these days of somewhere in the region of about £36,000–37,000. So you can imagine a house costs 3 times your annual salary, and at the age of 22 or 23, you might have met somebody, you might have got a mortgage, you might then start to think about garden centres and having children and playing golf, and that meant that the band demographic is naturally going to change. A lot of people are going to think about the bands that they liked between the age of 16 to 22, and they're not going to be paying so much attention to music after that point. It's a thing that hits every band at some point, maybe 15, 20 years in at the very, very latest. Pet Shop Boys, it hit them pretty early, really, because a lot of the people that were fans of them in 1985, who were 15, were then, by 1990, they're 20. By 1988, maybe 18. They're starting to grow older, and so this was the beginning of the end of their Imperial Phase. Unlike the previous 4 singles, which had all charted, apart from Rent, It's a Sin went to number 1, What Have I Done to Deserve This went to number 2, Always on My Mind went to number 1, Halt went to number 1. It's not unrealistic to expect the next Pet Shop Boys single to be the 3rd number 1 in a row. And then Domino Dancing came out and it peaked at number 7. And Domino Dancing peaked at number 7 because it just wasn't as good as the other songs. It wasn't as English, it wasn't as British, it was more international, more Latin. It had a lot of flamenco guitar in it. It had some quite unusual rhythms. It didn't sound British in the way that songs like It's a Sin or Rent or West End Girls sounded British. If you were to put West End Girls on and you go, that's made by an Englishman, and you can tell that, and then that's part of Pet Shop Boys' identity, is being English or being British. But for this definitely didn't sound like a British song, and that's probably where, although the band were working on an international basis, people first started to think, okay, maybe not the band for me. So this 7-inch was the end of the Imperial Phase. From here, the first spring of the band's life came to a close, and then they kind of entered into perhaps a longer term longevity. Some bands, of course, as I've said, their Imperial Phase lasts 1 song or 1 album, and Pet Shop Boys had managed to make it last until just about the beginning of the 3rd album. And so Domino Dancing didn't do particularly well. And it doesn't help necessarily that the imagery that the band had used on previous covers was quite local. It was quite British, whereas this is very clearly, it says Latin American Party in big letters on the front. So it very clearly kind of signals the song's lineage. And the song came out on a 7-inch, came out on a cassette single, which I think I've got. It's a 12-inch version of Domino Dancing here. An early version of the 12-inch came in a different sleeve. And if you want to get really, really techie about it, have a look at that. That's the mix enabled on the track. Or that's a screen grab of the song being recorded on, if I recall correctly, March the 17th, 1988. And nothing dates faster than technology. If you look at this, it tells you that the sample rate there is 48k, which at the time was probably, an enormous amount of memory. But these days, 48k, you get through that in 2 seconds, 1 second. On Instagram in the age of Wi-Fi. So Domino Dancing came in a 12-inch. It was backed with it had a disco mix of Domino Dancing on the A side. It had a disco mix with the B side, Dom 1, on it as well, and an alternative mix of Domino Dancing, which was a minimal electro version, which was very, very, very kind of relaxed, almost ambient actually, with very little in the way of population of the instrument. So there was also, of course, a week later, your standard 12-inch remix single, not available on CD. This one features a version called the bass mix of Domino Dancing, which has different rhythm tracks and different structure and demos of Dom 1 and Domino Dancing. But that went to number 7. And that wasn't what the band wanted or needed to hear. There was also, of course, your CD single. Let's open the CD single. Oh, how exciting. It's a CD in a bit of card. And the CD single, again, features the picture on the back. But this time it's in green, not blue. How exciting. No, it isn't. And all this was kind of the precursor towards what was going to be the third album. And the third album, not taking into account disco, is this beastie, Introspective. I'll put a context around this. Introspective was released in autumn 1988. It was the height of acid house, which was all over the place. It was in a lot of newspapers. It was, the scourge that is sweeping Britain around disco pills, and the Top of the Pops had to show tracks like Jack Your Body and all that kind of stuff, because that's what was popular and what was in the charts. The Hitman and Her was practically required viewing if you were under the age of 20. Even I watched it and I was like, God, nightclubs, they look so loud and so boring, and everyone's so drunk and there's so many lights. But nonetheless, it was popular, and this album was kind of straddled more towards the disco dance elements of Pet Shop Boys, as opposed to perhaps the more classic songwriting production era. And Pet Shop Boys clearly have two personalities as individuals. There's Chris, who on the surface of things is quite reserved and always seems to spend his entire life saying no to somebody about something. And then there's Neil, who's perhaps more erudite and more classical, I think, perhaps more in tune with classical music and opera and stage play and musicals, whereas Chris loves nothing more than a cap and a really chunky bass line that sounds like sex on a stick. The more chunky bass line dance element of it won here. And the strange thing is for Introspective is it's an album of 6 new songs, although only one of them at the time of release of the album was actually unreleased. If you've been buying all the Pet Shop Boys stuff, bit by bit, here and here, the only new song on this was the opening track, Left to My Own Devices. So each side, 3 songs. Side 1, let's say that's the cover of side 1, is Left to My Own Devices, which is 8 minutes. A remix by Frankie Knuckles of I Want a Dog, which was the B-side of Rent, and the 12-inch version of Domino Dancing, which probably lands you at around about 22, 23 minutes. A big 12-inch mixes, versions of the songs. And the strange thing is, I Want a Dog was remixed by Frankie Knuckles, and there are a number of remixes. I don't quite know why they chose to do remixes of the B-sides, but they did. And the other remix that Frankie Knuckles did, called the Techno Funk remix, is on this CD single from 1991. So nothing goes to waste in Pet Shop Boys' world. Everything becomes useful eventually. So even though the band had written a lot more songs, they had a 6-song album when I felt a bit shortchanged. This is probably my least favourite album that they'd done up to this point. In fact, it was my least favourite album, and it still ranks fairly low, probably about halfway throughout the whole band's discography now, for me, because it's only 6 songs. And even though they're really cutely holding a dog here, whose name I think is Booblies, even though they're really holding a cute dog on the album inner sleeve, it felt quite shallow actually. Which you may have seen a previous episode about, Introspective felt like a step back. It felt like, for example, when Damon Albarn had made 13, which I think is a fantastic record, the whole of Blur, fantastic record, but then he went to doing somewhat meaningless, very, very shallow stuff in Gorillaz. This felt like the same kind of thing, like the band had gone so far and was so good. I was really, really hoping that their next album would be a really important, brilliant kind of treatise on what it was to be alive in Thatcher's Britain in 1988. Instead, we got 6 songs of 12-inch remixes with chunky bass that were largely a lot shallower in terms of lyrical content, but also in terms of musical content. It was on 12-inch mixes, for which 7-inch mixes didn't actually exist. And so, for example, you've got Left to My Own Devices, which is 8.5 minutes long. Absolutely fantastic song, but probably about 2 minutes too long, actually. You've got I Want a Dog, which again, great song, absolutely love it. But I Want a Dog is too long, and it's already been on a B-side. So if you bought Rent, you've already got I Want a Dog. Domino Dancing is the single, which only went to number 7. And then the B-side, you've got I'm Not Scared. Now, I'm Not Scared was a single for Patsy Kensit, recording under the name Eighth Wonder, doing a Pet Shop Boys song that the Pet Shop Boys produced. But really, all it is a Pet Shop Boys remix of the Eighth Wonder track with Neil Tennant singing vocals, that takes a lot of sound from the 1968 French riots. It's okay, but it wasn't amazing. And it really didn't. I was like, I've already got I'm Not Scared on a 7-inch single. I want new Pet Shop Boys songs. I don't want Neil singing a remix of a song that was already a hit 6 months ago for somebody else. Track 5 is a 9-minute version of Always on My Mind / Always in My House. And as I mentioned in a previous episode, there is a fantastic 12-inch mix of Always on My Mind, which is by Phil Harding. Phil Harding, by the way, did a lot of engineering work for Stock Aitken and Waterman. And he'd added a new brass riff into that 12-inch mix, which is fantastic. That mix is still not officially on a CD, apart from an American promo, which sells for about £100 to record collector scum like me. But Always on My Mind in My House is 9 minutes, and it starts out, it slowly builds all of the elements of the track that comes in until it builds into a 7-inch version. Then it stops. Then you've got Neil doing an extra couple of verses where he's rapping variations of, well, you're always on my mind, it's true, the only thing I think about is you, you're in my mind and in my heart, and etc, etc. I mean, I don't, and then they speed up the vocal by speeding up the tape, and it's just a shit version of the song. Absolutely disappointing. You know, it should have been the limited remix 12-inch A-side as opposed to an album track. It's just a crap mix of Always on My Mind. And then that's followed by a cover version of Sterling Void's It's Alright, which was taken from or inspired by a CD called, I think, Chicago House Classics 3 House Tracks, when it was on the compilation CD, and they decided they liked it so much they were going to do a cover version of it. The band have been fairly open. That version of It's Alright, which is on this LP, they don't like. It's an early version of the song. It sounds like an expensive demo because, frankly, that's all it is. And it's not very good. So it sounds like I'm kicking this album. I am. Side A is pretty good. Side B is okay. And the last 2 songs are probably the worst 2 songs on any single Pet Shop Boys album, studio album, in these forms. And by the way, you know, I've got an alternate track listing for Introspective that makes the album a lot better. The other thing is, if you're going to do an album called Introspective, don't paint it in Dayglow rave covers and fill it full of disco tracks, because it's not introspective at all. There's no navel gazing in this album at all. The only thing that anyone's gazing at is the ceiling while they're whacked off their head on drugs for this album. And I don't want to criticise it, but it's not the best Pet Shop Boys album. It felt like an enormous climb down. It felt like if you'd gone from watching Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade straight through to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull a couple of years later. You know, it's the worst sequel that there could have been to Actually. It's just not that good an album. And I have an alternate track listing that features some of the B-sides, which I'm going to post down there, which will hopefully present the album in a better light. Oh, sorry, I was meant to hide a yawn. That didn't work, did it? So, the next thing that happened, and this is in Christmas 1989, the band released this Left to My Own Devices as a 12-inch and as a 7-inch. There's a cassette. There's also a CD single, and this CD came in a kind of double pack. For the first time in quite a while, the band didn't do a second remix 12-inch, by the way. So Left to My Own Devices came in this sleeve here, and also this version here, which contains a kind of like a yellow outer card with the single inside. So there's a 12-inch mix, of Left to My Own Devices on here, and then there's 2 7-inch tracks. The 12-inch mix, the disco mix, is awful. Actually, it's probably my least favourite Pet Shop Boys 12-inch from the days when they actually did extended mixes on 12 inches, because the extended mix is already on the album. That's a brilliant version of the track on the album, although it's probably about 3 minutes too long for the album. This is an extended mix, so effectively this would be if you had the limited remix 12-inch with the really weird, out there, crazy, psychedelic, experimental, not particularly good 10-minute piano solo version would be the version that would be on this 12-inch here. And the B-side is certainly the worst song the Pet Shop Boys have released in a very, very long time indeed. Now, in their mind, they probably think they're being wacky and experimental, doing a 5-minute kind of broken house music record called The Sound of the Atom Splitting. And it is, you know, a very heavy, instrumental, squiggly, I can't even get the 7-inch out, I don't even know why I'm bothering. A very squiggly 4-minute acid house track with lots of distorted bass and nil talent in a heavily vocoded and treated vocal, saying things like, I hate you, nothing will ever be the same. Oh really, is that what you're doing? It's awful. It's the worst Pet Shop Boys song, probably the worst Pet Shop Boys song ever, actually. My least favourite of their songs that I can instantly recall. Even a song like The Night I Fell in Love is better, by the way, and that is from the release album. Now, for the first time, the band didn't do a limited remix 12-inch, although there were extra remixes that were available. There was a remix of Left to My Own Devices by Shep Pettibone, which is here on this On You Sound promo 12-inch, which is a mega mix, plus a track called Device. Now, Device on the B side of this is one of the Pet Shop Boys Shep Pettibone remixes, which wasn't released. And I'm going to kind of explain why, but I'm going to bring out this beastie. Now, for most of you, you will not have a clue what record this is. This is an unreleased Pet Shop Boys promotional 3 12-inch club mixes version of the Introspective album that was released as a promotional triple 12-inch in the US. Now, this copy looks pretty beat up. It is. The reason it's pretty beat up is because this comes from Shep Pettibone's personal collection. He had 3 12-inches that he was given for these. This is one of those 3 12-inches. This is the copy that he played out when he was doing DJ sets. If you saw Shep Pettibone do a DJ set and he played a remix of Left to My Own Devices, it came off this 12-inch. So this 12-inch has been in a lot more interesting places than I have. This is from his collection. So there are 3 12-inches on this version here, and they are the remix of I Want a Dog, backed with I'm Not Scared on 12-inch number 1. 12-inch number 2 is the LP version of It's Alright, plus the LP version, the one I don't like, of Always on My Mind. And as you will see, this has the BPMs on there to help DJs when they're doing it. This is the one that is probably most of interest. This has 4 unreleased remixes on it from the Introspective album. It's got 2 remixes of Always on My Mind, which are on side 2. They're called the Shep's Holiday Mix and Shep's House Mix. Again, those would have been on a limited edition remix 12-inch if they'd have had the good fortune and decision to hold back the Phil Harding version and put it on an LP. And then on side 1, you've got the Shep Pettibone mix of Left to My Own Devices and the Device mix of Left to My Own Devices, both by Shep Pettibone, both unavailable commercially. So this is a pretty rare beastie. Not cheap to get necessarily. I won't tell you how much I paid for it, but not as much as you might think. Definitely 2 figures, not 3, by the way. But the remixes are okay, and they should have been on remix 12-inches. You know, Left to My Own Devices did not do particularly well in the charts for a number of reasons. The first one being it was the last song from the album, and if you bought the album, there was no need to buy the single because it was only 6 songs on the album. The second one was there was no remix 12-inch, and the remix 12-inch that there was pretty terrible. The third reason was there were plans to do a remix 12-inch, and they did a test pressing of it. They gave it away on, I think, a BBC show called Saturday Superstore, which I think has the Frankie Knuckles Royal House piano mix on the A side, which is better than the actual 12-inch mix, but still not particularly good. And I can completely understand why they didn't do it. So that's your triple 12-inch there of the club mixes from Introspective. But the band didn't let the grass grow beneath their feet. They carried on it. So they did the first of a series of formats of Introspective. This is a triple 12-inch version designed, a limited edition of 3 12-inch singles of Introspective, which they released. £6.99 this cost me. Probably quite expensive now. Probably, at least £10 I would have thought. It's 3 12-inch singles in the outsized kind of covers. And I'll talk about actually the covers. What it does is each cover and colour matches with the colours that you've got. So you've got yellow, you've got green, then you've got the pink, then lo and behold the B side of the pink is, I think, the red, and then you've got the purple, and you've got the blue. So it really is more of a piece of design work as opposed to an album. And each one of these had single covers or potential single covers from the albums, and also used oversized 12-inch labels. It's a nice bit of formatting. That's all these are. Nothing more than a nice bit of formatting. But and this is kind of important to note, is Pet Shop Boys always took great care over the visual presentation and the covers and the sleeves that they had for their records. And I'm going to talk about that because hopefully I'll have bookmarked a page in this book, which is called Literally by Chris Heath. And what they've said is, page 284 of this, by the way, in the 1989 edition, says, "Why do you care so much about your record sleeves?" To which Neil says, "Well, we've always been a bit of a luxury product. The first sleeve of West End Girls, we wanted to look like a Chanel perfume bottle. We wanted our records to be bought because there was an intrinsic worth about them and not for any begging reason. We're trying to make the records more desirable to ourselves, and we do it because if it's in our record collection, it's got to look good." And Neil says, "I often look through our records and think how fantastic they look. You want to make the record something special. It's not just nothing, the sleeve. It's as important as the music. You're buying an object and you want it to be a beautiful object, and the sleeve should give you things to wonder about." And one of the questions is, does it pay off commercially? Well, it says something's unique. The cover says this is a new Pet Shop Boys record. It only bears a relation to the previous Pet Shop Boys records. Most pop groups would go on opportunity knocks if they were asked, and we wouldn't. We have to have an aura, and having an aura means that you are something unique. Most pop groups are nothing unique, they are anything. Consequently, nobody really likes them. Whereas Pet Shop Boys are unique, you can recognise one of our things immediately. What they're trying to do through all the visual activity is very, very clearly demarcate that they exist in their own slightly alternative version. And I've mentioned this theory before, that having 2 personalities, 2 characters in the band, one of whom barely reacts to anything and the other one occasionally reacts to things, whilst the world passes them by, is very much kind of like making them almost like a disco version of Gilbert and George with pop music. You've got 2 personalities that almost seem to be standing incidentally in the midst of something. Either when they're standing on a sleeve, either something's just happened or something is about to happen. And you can see that when you look at the sleeves that they've got for the records. The sleeve for Left to My Own Devices here, it looks like it's the beginning of some kind of bizarre horror movie. He's sitting in the chair, it's a dentist's chair, and there's 2 bowler hats, and that's very clearly kind of designed to kind of send out almost a message or a knowledge that there's a secret, a mass-produced secret, and you as a Pet Shop Boys fan know that secret that nobody else does. New Order did it as well, and Depeche Mode have done it with their sleeves. It's really, really important in a band's visual identity to be able to look at a sleeve and instantly go, that's a New Order record, that's a Pet Shop Boys record. If you look at a 9 Inch Nails record, and by the way, I'm just going to bring out here the soundtrack for The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, that is not a soundtrack album cover, you look at that and you go, that's a Nine Inch Nails related cover, because it's got something about it that intrinsically characters or captures the characteristics of the band. And the reason I'm going to put that back there is because the CD's directly behind the phone where I'm doing this. Whereas if you pull out, you know, and you order one, and here's one you've seen earlier, Round and Round, there is no other band that would have that as a cover. Absolutely no other band. There's a, you know, distinct personality. Or a Mogwai sleeve. You look at a Mogwai sleeve and you go, that's Mogwai. You don't know how, but you know it is. Well, actually, you do know why, because it's a designer called DLT, who's a fantastic designer. So, whilst I've been talking at you about Pet Shop Boys sleeves, come February 1989, the band recorded a one-off single with Dusty Springfield called Nothing Has Been Proved. A new original Pet Shop Boys track with Dusty Springfield on vocals, and so therefore it tells itself as being a Dusty Springfield track, even though it isn't. And there's a gatefold sleeve in this version. They're still very, very clear, even, you know, just looking at that, and you could go, even though it doesn't say Dusty Springfield, there's something about that sleeve that intrinsically tells you it's at least Pet Shop Boys adjacent here. But Nothing Has Been Proved came out in a number of formats. There's a gatefold 12-inch, and here's an original 7-inch here with a different cover. This is an Electro. I think this is the German version actually, and yes, it will have and like all good records, they have their own stories to tell, because this one says "You're Mine" with a sticker from the previous owner and a phone number 0902 27030. That's not a UK number, because in the UK it'd be 0902 and then six numbers. So I think that's a German owner that previously had it. But Nothing Has Been Proved is a great song, probably underrated, and it also the Pet Shop Boys version of it has been released. So come to the summer of 1989, Pet Shop Boys released their umpteenth single, It's Alright, a completely re-recorded, remixed, revamped version of the worst track off the most recent LP. This is a 7-inch that has what's called a belly band that's on it. This one has probably been played a lot. I'm surprised the belly band hasn't been sellotaped back together with my keen adolescent hands taking it out, putting it back on. But it was completely re-recorded, and the re-recorded version of it is far, far superior to the LP mix. The LP mix is literally the worst kind of limited edition remix 12-inch B-side kind of version of the track. So It's Alright there as a 7-inch. And It's Alright was, to put it technically, formatted to fuck. Sorry to swear, ladies and jelly spoons, but it was. It came in a 12-inch, it came in a remix 12-inch, which is there, and it came in a 10-inch with a poster. Naturally, I bought the lot. There's also a CD single, which is here. Hello, I'm a CD single. They don't make me anymore. So It's Alright. I think the best place to start talking about that is to talk about the 10-inch single, by the way, because they re-recorded the song twice in 1989 to try and get a good pop version of it. They weren't satisfied with the LP mix. And the first re-recording is the 10-inch mix on the A side of this, which has an alternative vocal and some extra parts in it. The B side of it is an extended dance mix. It's 10.5 minutes long, which is an extended version of the original re-recording from 1989, not the re-recording which actually came out on the 7-inch. So there's two re-recordings. The 10-inch contains the first 1989 re-recording and a remix of the first 1989 re-recording. The other versions contain the second re-recording when they felt they hadn't quite nailed it, and those are on the 7-inch, 12-inch and 12-inch remix. And the 12-inch remix, this is an extended 12-inch remix here of the second recording of It's Alright. This doesn't have the belly band sticker on, primarily because I was a clumsy child and I didn't really care about such things. I cared about the music. The music is what interested me. It's what made me feel that life was tolerable, and it's the thing that really drew me into the band was the music. I wasn't interested in any of the art stuff. All that stuff became relevant later on over time. For the start, I didn't give a shit about that. what was in the grooves. That's what moved me. Everything else kind of slotted in around that. And then we've got the 12-inch version here. On the B side of the 12-inch and the 7-inch, we've got 2 extra tracks. One called One of the Crowd, which is brilliant, and another one called Your Funny Uncle, which is equally brilliant. Chris Lowe sings sort of heavily vocoded vocals on One of the Crowd, with lines like, "Dressing individually doesn't impress me. I think that is pathetic. Call it fashion. I just like it, don't I?" And then the chorus has him extolling the virtues of going fishing. The second track is called Your Funny Uncle, and that was played as the last song on their 1991 tour. But Your Funny Uncle was also a narrative around a funeral which Neil had to attend. And as I've mentioned in a previous episode, there were dead and wounded on either side. The AIDS crisis was rampant. It was an epidemic inside the culture at that point. Friends were dying left, right and centre. Uncles, aunties, friends, lovers, all those type of things, and those all built into the knowledge of, you know, that the 80s was a catastrophic decade to be young and gay or bisexual in Britain. You had the AIDS Don't Die of Ignorance advert, which I've mentioned in a previous episode, and you've got all of this kind of fear that if you sat on the same toilet as a gay person that you'd automatically get AIDS. They said AIDS don't die of ignorance, but they didn't do enough to really combat it. And so part of the song and you know the hymn and mantra around it is that we feel it on a timeless wavelength, never dissipating but giving us strength. It's going to be all right. And what you really needed amongst all of that was a huge beacon of hope, and music gave us that. This is the 12-inch remix of It's Alright. It's backed with a remix by Tyree and a remix by Sterling Void himself. So Sterling Void remixing a cover version of his own track. They aren't particularly good, and the CD singles are both staggeringly expensive and definitely not worth it, but worthwhile to have if you can get the 12-inch. And around about the same time, Neil and Chris spent some time in the studio with Bernard Sumner and Johnny Marr to record this single, Getting Away With It by Electronic, which I've mentioned in the previous episode about Solo New Order. By the way, what I may not have mentioned is that the lyric to Getting Away With It is actually a sly dig at Morrissey about walking in the rain all day just to feel worse and getting wet on purpose, and getting away with it all my life. Nothing like a bit of catty bitchiness about other music artists, especially considering Johnny Marr's previous role as the guitarist and musical wing of the Smiths. And that brings us to the summer of 1989. The summer of 1989 was when Pet Shop Boys went out on the road and played their first tour ever. Here is the tour programme. I didn't go to the tour because I was 15 years old and I couldn't afford the tickets. I also, by the way, definitely couldn't afford the £60 sweatshirt which they were selling here, and they've included it as part of the news feature in the Birmingham Evening Mail on the 15th of July. No, the Birmingham Evening Telegraph, and there was a comment around how the merchandise was too expensive. Anyway, I didn't see Pet Shop Boys on this tour. I really, really wish I had, but I just didn't have the money. And you know, it's something heartbreaking to find one of the bands that shaped who you are as an individual is playing 9 miles over there, and you can't afford to go to see it. It's one of the reasons why I've been to see so many shows over the past few years, and I really, really miss them. So I'm just going to give you a quick tour of the tour programme. And the first thing I will say about the tour programme is they had plenty of copies of these left over after the tour. So I used to go to record fairs, and they used to have huge racks of tour programmes for £1, leftover ones that people were buying for literally pennies. You know, I could have picked up 30 of these for £30. I didn't. I probably should have done. I could have sold them for a fortune, actually. Same thing with the New Order one I showed you in a previous episode. But this kind of tour program takes a very similar approach to the previous Pet Shop Boys publications, literally, and the book as well, with a certain type of text, a certain type of feel. If you didn't know who this was and you knew Pet Shop Boys, you go, that's a Pet Shop Boys tour program. And Pet Shop Boys released a live VHS from the tour called Highlights, which I didn't buy because Highlights is only 30 minutes long, even though the band played shows at Wembley Arena, and they played an extra show in an empty Wembley Arena so Derek Jarman could film the show. They only approved half an hour of footage. The full show is now available on YouTube. I will put the link down there, but I didn't buy the VHS because the VHS was about £11, and £11 for half an hour of live Pet Shop Boys. I couldn't afford that when I could spend £6 and get an album, and for £11 I could get 2 albums, probably 3 or 4 actually, second-hand prices from Second City Sounds or Swordfish. But in 1993 they did release this, which is Projections, which is a collaborative VHS video with Derek Jarman of the screen projections and background films that were used. Should Highlights get a DVD release, it would be, in my opinion, inexcusable not to have this, or the contents of this VHS tape on there, which is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, about 8 or 9 Pet Shop Boys promotional films used as projections from the tour, filmed by Derek Jarman here. And by the way, the film on here cost £150,000 to make. I know that because it is mentioned in this book, and this is a journalist called Chris Heath, who followed the band on tour when they played Japan, Hong Kong and the UK on their first tour in the summer of 1989, right from the rehearsals all the way through to the last show. It's wonderfully indiscreet and bitchy, and it has some really illuminating passages in it. Probably one of the best books about music that's been written, very much in a reportage style. So, for example, there's a couple of bits of information that isn't widely known that's mentioned in here. The first one is, for example, is that they never got a royalty from the original version of West End Girls that came out in 1984. And as part of their severance package from a contract with Bobby Orlando, who was the producer, which wasn't going to work, they put a ceiling of $1 million on what they would pay him in royalties, because they never thought they'd ever earn $1 million from being in the band. And the royalty from the first 3 EMI albums, being Please, Actually and Introspective, were ones where Bobby Orlando got a percentage out of their royalties. So they paid him $1 million for those 2 singles in the end, and obviously that was that. It's a situation that I think over time they've come to regret, but life can only be lived forwards, even if it can only be understood backwards. And the second thing, which I think really comes out through this, is the difference in their personalities, their cultural backgrounds, and the personalities which Chris and Neil have, which I've mentioned and alluded to previously. And I think at an early point, I think Tom Watson, the band's manager, was saying to Neil, "You don't really need Chris." And Neil was very much like, "I do. I need Chris, because Chris is the person who's the counterbalance. Chris is the person that says no. Chris is the person." And his role in the band, apart from writing the music, is sometimes just go in and go, "No, we're not doing that. That's not right." And actually, every band needs somebody like that. And I was talking downstairs earlier around how every band, in order to be really, really successful, has to be somebody who's obsessed with the band. That's their life's work. That's their creative compulsion or obsession. And I think actually in Pet Shop Boys, you've got 2 people that are obsessed with the band, the image, and how they present themselves. The other thing, by the way, which Neil says in here, which is really, really important, and that's where I'm going to wrap up, is that a lot of people think that the Pet Shop Boys have some kind of ironic detachment from the music, and they don't believe it, and it's all a poise and a pose and a play and a performance. But Neil says very clearly, is actually everything that we do is very, very sincere. The problem is that his voice automatically sounds British, it sounds reserved, it sounds repressed, it sounds at a distance and not fully engaged in what's going on, which is why people then don't take the band seriously, which they absolutely should do. And having that combination of that arch, aloof vocal, which frankly that's his voice, he can't change that, combined with some quite epic pounding dance and techno and disco music from the time, makes it sound like they're just actually standing at the side of the dance floor watching everything going on, as opposed to participating in it and fully believing it. I'm going to wrap up here. Introspective is not my favourite Pet Shop Boys album. It is a fascinating failure in the band's career, And I think it's also the one where it became very, very clear that the band weren't going to be one-hit wonders. They were in it for the long haul. And it seems crazy to think that it's 40 years since they met this year, and somehow they're still going and they're still writing songs that are as good as ever. As I have said, unlike some other bands, some bands kind of slow down, mellow out, get a little rubbish over the years, because Pet Shop Boys have a drum machine. Drum machines don't get tired, so they're still producing stuff that is as good as anything they ever did. I'm going to wrap up here. Thank you for your time and your interest. As ever, there is always going to be one person who downvotes everything I do as soon as I load it up. It's weird to think that I live rent-free in your mind, and you seem to do that. It's a bit weird, and I notice it. It's weird. It's just weird, man. It's just weird. But aside from that, the rest of you, all lovely. Take care of yourselves. Hope to see you at the end of this lockdown, when we can all go to the pubs and leave the house and do actual real live things with other people in person. But that, as they say in Star Wars, is a story for another time. Take care of yourselves and each other. I will see you all again. And as every great musician says, thank you and good night. Bye.